did not produce the Ebionite gospel, but other people have said no. They just had they kept a shorter version of Matthew's tradition. So it's one of those things where perhaps they had special M or something. They had their own. They did not have the Gospel of Matthew that we know, but they had some sort of primitive version of it, or like proto, like something on the side. But who knows really?
Well, what it made me wonder about is there any chance that whoever penned Matthew had the virgin birth in there or not? That's what I was interested in. I guess we can never know. It's just interesting to think about.
No, no, I hear what you're saying. From what I've read, like it's definitely early. Like in a lot of the early church fathers' commentaries on it, they're commentating on Matthew's version of the virgin birth. Um, but yeah, they are commentating on Matthew's version of the virgin birth, and they're doing that from pretty much from like 150 onwards. So
So pretty early.
it's pretty early, but from commentary standards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always wonder about it because we don't really have commentaries on any gospels until close to the 2nd century, right? Toward the
Yeah.
end of the 1st century.
Well, basically, towards the start of the 2nd century, you get little tiddly bits in people like Justin Martyr. But what makes it really difficult is he doesn't identify them like we do. So, for example, he'll call them the Memoirs of the Apostles, and he'll quote something, and it's like, oh, that's from Mark. Um,
But
but
not quite. Mm-hmm.
Well, but it's like, is it from Mark? Is it from a proto-Mark? Is the Memoirs of the Apostles something like Q? Like, we just don't know. Um, and then what else you get is, so those are the first sort of little things. We also have sermons where sermon writers are starting to, towards the middle of the 2nd century, they're starting to quote the Memoirs of the Apostles and things like that with authority, almost like Scripture, pretty much like Scripture. When you get towards the end of the 2nd century, that's when you start getting commentaries. That's when you get people like Irenaeus and eventually Jerome and people like that, like really writing detailed philosophical and theological extracts on these weighty tomes. So yeah.
Yeah. The other interesting consideration is, and it's a little bit of a stretch maybe, but it's still interesting, is I think Papias said that Matthew was originally written in Hebrew,
Yeah.
but our Matthew doesn't seem to have been.
Yeah, that's
Greek.
really funny. That's really funny because Bart Ehrman presented on this at SVL this year.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he basically pointed out how a lot of textual critics use Papias's testimony they play fast and loose with it. They use Papias when it suits them. It's like, aha, see, here's Matthew, things like
Right.
that.
Is it our Matthew?
Well, not so much that, but when Papias talks about, interviewing, when Papias talks about interviewing disciples of John, other, people like, oh, see, he's doing that. But then when he talks about, Matthew
Judas.
being written in Hebrew, he's saying, oh, that's because Papias didn't understand the difference between, like some scholars have made stretches between, like, oh, that's because Papias didn't understand the difference between Aramaic and Hebrew, or things like that. Like, some of these stretches these scholars make to kind of force Papias to say something he's not.
Yeah.
And he wrote about it on his blog today. But yeah, it was very interesting because it looks like what Ehrman's next book is about oral tradition and written tradition in the early church.
Oh, that would be. I'd love to read that. Something like that.
Yeah, he's on his blog. a while ago, he's been talking about what's next. And what he's doing right this moment is updating yet again his introduction to the New Testament. So this will be the 9th edition of it, I think. So that'll be another $80 for poor undergraduates to fork out. However, in terms of his next popular book, he's been really focused on eyewitness testimony, social memory, community identity, oral tradition, written tradition, and he's basically trying to put his own voice to the how reliable is the New Testament, pretty much. Like that, it seems like that's what he's exploring.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting because he's come from one angle before with forgery and counter forgery and contradictions. So this angle will be an interesting way for him to look at it, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm.
I was thinking too, if just give Papias the benefit of the doubt and say he had seen a Gospel of Matthew in Hebrew or something.
Yeah.
It's a crazy thought, but maybe, and it's total speculation. It'd be interesting, like if the Ebionites had composed some kind of gospel that they called Matthew that was in Hebrew or Aramaic, whichever, and it actually may not have contained any story of a virgin birth, and who knows, maybe it didn't even contain an infancy narrative, and maybe that's the one Papias is referring to. I don't know, but all this stuff's so like speculative.
Well, something I like to point out to people is that we live in a world that identifies Matthew with the Matthew we have in our Bible.
Yeah.
But if you look at non-canonical texts, you have an Apocalypse of Peter and a Gospel of Peter. You have a Gospel of Thomas, and you have what else do you have? You have an infancy narrative of Thomas. Like you have things like that. So what we could be dealing with is competitive Gospels of Matthew. So there are multiple Gospels circulating, being attributed to Matthew, and Papias may know one of them, and maybe the one he knows wasn't the canonical one. In fact, was to be later deemed a heretical one. We don't know. That's something I like to point out to people.
Well, I've had the same thought about Marcion's Luke. I mean, did he really take our Luke and edit out stuff, or did he have his own Luke that maybe it was maybe he used Mark, maybe he didn't, maybe it was something totally different.
Yeah.
Because the church fathers say that he edited the real Luke, because there was too much stuff in there that said that the God of Jesus was the God of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
But I wonder if it went in the opposite direction, possibly.
Well, it's interesting because the stuff about Marcion being an editor of Luke comes like 3rd century. It's not.
Oh, really? So Tertullian or those guys don't mention it?
See, and this is where it gets tricky. And I sort of hinted at it in my thesis, but because it wasn't really the topic of my thesis, Marcion's accused of corrupting the gospel, and he is accused by Tertullian of editing the gospel with falsities and heresies. He is accused of that, but nowhere near with the details we get later on, where it's like he chops and slices Galatians, he chops and slices Luke. We don't get those specific details, and it's one of those things where how much evidence do we grant these later? And some of them aren't that much later. Like they are towards the end of it. They are towards the turn of the 2nd to the 3rd century. So but we just don't know without the contradictions or the antithesis, whatever you want to call it, surviving. How do we know for certain what was in Marcion's scrapbook?
Yeah, it's hard to say. And the same thing, the same question with the epistles. I mean, you have to wonder the same thing, because you'd run into the same stuff in the epistles. I mean, same problem with it. If they were as we have them, Marcion would have had to have edited them in some way in order to basically preach his gospel, as it were. Because there's, even in Paul's epistles, there's too much stuff linking back to Yahweh.
Well, here's the thing that I think Elaine Pagels and even Adolf von Harnack talks about, that Harnack supposes that even if Marcion did not have an edited version of Galatians in front of him, that doesn't necessarily mean that he had to edit it to get to the same conclusion. And something Harnack talks about is that it's not that he rejected the Old Testament necessarily, he just didn't think it was scripture. And
that was the God of justice, right?
Yeah, Harnack's idea is clearly Marcion uses the Old Testament when it suits him, because it proves his point that this God is evil.
Yeah.
But when it comes to actual using it for preaching, teaching, and salvation, it's useless. Which, that's the same point made by Paul in Galatians, that the Torah is nothing. The law is worthless, things like that. So, maybe he did have our Galatians and he didn't need to edit it to get to his conclusion.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way. I would have just thought that, like, when you hear some of the church fathers saying that he edited stuff, my immediate thought is, oh, he must be like expunging things about references to the Old Testament or something like that. But the way you put it makes a lot of sense. Like, that wasn't necessarily an evil God or not a God. I mean, he was a God to Marcion. He just wasn't the God of love and grace, the God of Jesus Christ. Yeah, he was like
I do think that Marcion believed the God of the Old Testament was evil.
Really?
I think he did. I think he still believed. To me, it's sort of like what you talk about. You referenced it. Man, we really have turned this into the Marcion fan club podcast. But anyway, I think he did, because of his rejection of matter. That really says a lot to me, and also just the way he doesn't use it as scripture, and he lords over the superiority. It's clear that the evil God is a divinity and therefore is more powerful than Marcion. It's sort of like the devil. Christians acknowledge that the devil is this all-powerful, all-seeing evil, mini deity, but he's still evil. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do get it. Yeah.
That's Sebastian Moll's thesis. I agree with.
So he argues that Marcion did have like an evil conception of Yahweh as an evil God, an anti-God.
Yeah, Moll argues that this basically it was evil justice, is what Moll sort of suggests, where you have a God who loves to create laws that people cannot hold,
right?
And then watches them fail, and
kind of torturing them with impossible regulations. Yeah,
exactly. He gives them the Torah just to watch them make the golden calf.
Well, Paul actually says stuff like that. Yeah. He says that the Torah was given not for righteousness, but to increase sin or something like that. I forget the exact wording. But
it's those sorts of lines that people like Pagels and Harnack and even Hoffman have suggested, that you don't exactly need an edited Galatians to get to Marcion's conclusions. It's the same, because we still have this problem. Modern Christians still have this problem. They don't know what to do with the God of the Old Testament,
Yeah. I just want to read, for the sake of the broadcast, what Reuben had posted. He says, I think Marcion fully endorsed Judaism, including the legitimacy of a future Mashiach ben David, and the accuracy of Judaism as a separate covenant between the Creator and Israel. But I know some propose he could have been anti-Semitic.
Yeah, a few people have supposed. The problem is, what I'll say to that, Reuben, is anti-Semitic is a modern sort of, our sort of sensitivities to those sort of issues. Um, I think Marcion was probably as anti-Jewish as any Christian towards the middle of the second century. Particularly when you read some of the sermons that some of these people in the second century are talking about, it's pretty much steeped in anti-Judaism. I think Marcion took Paul's gospel to the next step, to the next logical conclusion that that circumcision is nothing, Torah is nothing, kosher is nothing. Therefore, everything Jewish is just useless. Now, is that anti-Jewish? I suppose it is, but we're coming from very different paradigms and very different matrices. The other thing is, the Christians aren't in a place of power and political power to persecute Jews. So how did Marcion deal with Jews? We have no idea.
Do you feel that this is my impression of Paul in a lot of ways? The more I've read the epistles and read about stuff on him, I feel like he's walking the line between, he's teetering on the fence between being anti-Jewish almost. Then he also kind of bends and is almost like an apologist for Judaism in a lot of ways too. He has this almost two-faced approach. That sounds pejorative, but it's a mixed bag with him. It seems like in one letter he's saying, I wish circumcisers would have slipped with their hand, and and the Torah is nothing and circumcision's meaningless. But then in other ways, I forget which letter it is, but I think it's in I don't remember which one, but there's problems in the church where the Gentiles, the upper class Greek Gentiles, are making fun of the Jews, and he's going, "Hey guys, go easy on the Jews,"
Well, in Philippians, he says that he's a Hebrew born of Hebrews, and he uses it as credentials. That ironically, he then turns it away and says that it was nothing until he gets to Jesus, pretty much. But in my honors thesis, which I've sent you on epitasm, which is circumcision in reverse, which I see as a minor problem occurring in Corinth, in chapter 7, I think Paul is addressing epitasm. I think that some Jews who have become Christian, who have joined the Christian community, are taking Paul to his next logical conclusion, who have this freedom in Christ, and saying, well, we don't need to be Jews anymore. Let's undo our circumcision. And Paul's freaking out, and that's why he has to say, remain in your state. If you were a Gentile and you became a Christian, stay in uncircumcision. If you were circumcised and you became a Christian, stay in circumcision. That sort of thing. And it just really goes to show that what scholars have been harping on since the 20th century, these letters are occasional. They're written for a particular community at a particular time within Paul's life and the life of this community. And that's why Paul is all over the place.
Yeah, he does seem to be. He almost seems, again, this sounds pejorative, but I don't mean it to be that way, but he almost sounds opportunistic in a lot of ways in how he'll approach a situation. And one of the passages of Paul that Reuven always likes to quote is, that I'm all things to all people. So it seems like he wouldn't shy away from just taking whatever tack he needed to get a particular point across, whether he approached it from a defense of Judaism or completely attacking it, and saying it's worthless now.
Well, that's why Elizabeth Fierwenza from Harvard Divinity School, her book on rhetoric and politic really does a great exploration of Paul's writing, and she argues, which has basically become one of the majority opinions, is that Paul was probably just one voice in the early church, that we should really stop viewing Paul like this the systematic theologian who was writing these detailed arguments, and that when Paul's letter came to Corinth, that was the letter. Like that was going to be the stamp of canonical approval. And Fiorenza says that no, Paul talks about other leaders and other voices. Clearly, we are dealing in a community where Paul is competing. Paul's in competition with other voices. We just don't have those voices anymore.
Yeah.
So
Well, we have a hint of them in Galatians. I mean,
yeah.
some people from Jerusalem trying to get his community to circumcise. That's real interesting.
Well, and we also have I think it's in Second Thessalonians saying that, or is it Second Corinthians, about letters being written in his name, things like that.
So that's Second Thessalonians, yeah.
Yeah.
I really think. I know most scholars say that that's written by Paul, but when you read, don't they? Isn't that one of the 7 undisputed?
No. First Thessalonians is. Second Thessalonians.
Oh, my mistake. Okay.
Yeah. It's one of the ones that continually goes up for debate. Like unlike Colossians, for example, where the days of that being like Ephesians and Colossians, people pretty much say, look, 80%, like that's just me throwing a statistic. Thessalonians sort of goes backwards and forwards. Second Thessalonians comes in and out of vogue. So it's when people talk about like the disputed letters of Paul, it's not like all scholars think they're disputed. It's very letter by letter. It's very choppy.
Yeah.
I think it's inauthentic, but Luke Timothy Johnson's book on Paul really did make me change my mind for half a second. So I may if I get into Emery, maybe he'll change my mind again.
The biggest thing that struck me when reading him was in First Thessalonians, Paul, to me at least, seems to be talking in a very he's the apocalypse is coming, the end of the time is coming. He's anticipating that, and then you get to Second Thessalonians, and it literally says, "Now don't listen to any letters supposedly from me saying that the end times are coming,"
Yeah.
And isn't that the one too at the end where he says, "Look at how big I sign my name. That way you can recognize that it's really me." It just seems like it just screams like just like a forged counter to First Thessalonians.
I think Galatians also. Has look how big my letters are.
Maybe it is Galatians and not Thessalonians, and I may be mixing them up.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it is Second Thessalonians you're talking about, Doug.
Well, I'm talking about Second Thessalonians, but I don't know if it has the big letters thing.
The big letters thing is from Galatians 6:11. I was right.
Okay. Yeah, but the other thing about now, don't listen to other letters supposedly by me talking about how the world's coming to an end any minute, which is exactly what First Thessalonians is doing.
Exactly. I know. I agree completely. But one of the things that Fiorenza and others have pointed out is one of the things that a lot of people fail to recognize is that it looks like, going to Galatians, it looks like Paul failed at Galatia. Like, he never mentions any of the churches in Galatia ever again. Like, Antioch is never mentioned, and Galatia is never mentioned ever again. So it looks like
he lost.
He lost the day. He had to walk between, he had to walk away.
Because a bunch of his other letters, in almost any of his other letters, don't they mention other churches several times?
Yes. Yeah. He talks about churches in Macedonia. He talks about churches in Corinth or Ephesus. But the other one, or to send his blessings to these people from those churches. Never again does he mention a church in Galatia or in Antioch.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure, especially given the character of his letter and what he's describing happening there. I mean, if I was like in a church in Galatia and I've got the people, the apostles possibly of Jesus who are walking around Galilee, with Jesus, like And
Yeah,
they're telling me, hey, yeah, I know Paul's been talking to you guys, but he never actually saw Jesus. He just had a vision. We
yeah,
walked around with Jesus, and we're telling you to get circumcised. I'd be like, oh man.
yeah, exactly. And that's FC Bauer pointed that out, and like people today, David Sim, Ian Elmer, James Tabor, like these guys are just pointing out the stuff that clearly Paul is on the defensive with these other, the super apostles that are like, hey buddy, I knew Jesus, and Jesus did not break kosher, okay? Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, Paul is like when I first started really getting into reading the Bible critically and reading scholarship, I was all about the Gospels. And
yep.
now I'm getting more and more interested in Paul, and I just, despite myself, like I'm just getting.
I,
There's a lot to Paul, and there's so much in there.
I hear you, man. Like when I was in my undergraduate, I had the same experience. I wanted to be an historical Jesus scholar. I wanted to be an exegete of Mark in particular, but Dr. Elmer, my professor, just made me fall in love with Paul, despite how much I found him so boring from my Lutheran high school, who just loved reading from Paul all the time. But yeah, it was the way people like Gulda and the way that these other people talk about Paul. I just got invested in his emotion, and I can kind of see why scholars fall in love with him or grow to hate him. Like it's this real interesting thing, and people who I have a really I find myself siding with Paul just against myself. Like I try not to. I try to always like take the other position where it's like, okay, who is Paul? Well, it's the mirror reading tactic. So you read a text from the offensive position. So it's like, okay, Paul, you're saying this, but this is why I'm causing trouble in Corinth. So yeah, it's an interesting way of reading it. But sometimes he's persuasive, sometimes he's not.
Yeah, his exegesis is really shoddy to me. Like when he talks about Old Testament stuff, and then he goes on and does this interpretation of why he'll try to like recruit some Old Testament story to prove one of his points, and I'm always like, oh.
Well,
Like,
it's really interesting because my Dr. Elmer, my teacher, he makes the argument that Galatians is sort of Paul's crash course in how not to do exegesis. Like, because he makes the point that Paul brings up Abraham. Like, Dr. Elmer thinks that Galatians is Paul's first letter, despite everyone thinking that it's First Thessalonians. He thinks it's Galatians. I disagree with him, but anyway, it's clearly an early letter, and Elmer makes the point that Paul uses Abraham as the model once and once only, and never again, because he learns that the Abraham story is a really bad way to get his point across.
it's not convincing at all.
Exactly, it's not convincing at all. He never uses it again. Instead, he finds the jackpot with Adam.
Could you refresh me on his Adam thing? His Adam argument?
Well, basically that in Adam all people fall to sin, but in Christ all people are made alive. Like it's the
okay.
It's that whole first thing. That, and even though it's not there, it's kind of on the surface where it's like, was Adam circumcised? That sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, David. Christ is the second Adam. Where Adam was fallible, Christ is infallible, all that sort of stuff. But he never uses Abraham again because he learns from his mistakes. But Elmer's point is that the James community, the people from James referenced at Antioch in Galatians, one of the things they were probably using to pressure the Antioch Christians into getting circumcised was the Abraham story. And what Paul is trying to do is trying to say, no, guys, look, they're wrong. and it just adds insult to injury why Paul fails at Antioch.
That's really interesting. I never thought about that. I just thought this was something he cooked up, but it really makes sense to think of it as, oh yeah, this is what they say about Abraham. We'll look at it this way, except
Yeah.
it's a really horrible way to look at it, and probably made them even dig in their heels more. You know, the Galatians people.
Well, yeah, it's basically this is the. Yeah, there's a free version of his doctoral thesis online. I'll see if I can find it. But yeah, it's awesome. It basically what Elmer does is he looks at the Galatian crisis as a ripple effect, and basically sees the ripple effect of this. There you go. The ripple effect across the broadest possible ways, from his earliest days to his final days. And it's really interesting. I think Elmer has convincingly argued that what went down at Antioch basically shaped the rest of Paul's career.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems, just from what you said, it seems very convincing all the things seem to line up. The ducks are all in order with it, with
Yeah.
that sort of a look at it, that framework.
And the other thing with and I'm curious how you find this, Doug. When I started studying the Acts of Paul and Thecla, I just find Paul's afterlife fascinating. Like, what happens to him after his death, his legacy, his afterlife, as it were, from the missionary to the theologian. And what's really interesting about Paul, which brings us back to Marcion, is so many people in the early church don't really reference Paul at all. Like, Paul's not really there in the 2nd century. It's only until like the 3rd and 4th century that Paul kind of finds his voice again. And one of the people who helps give it to him is, on the one hand, Marcion, and later John Chrysostom, John Chrysostom loves Paul, loves Romans.
Romans, yeah, I can see why any theologian would love Romans.
But people like Irenaeus, for example, don't really care about Paul. Like, Paul's there, but he's not Peter. He's not the rock of the church. So it's really interesting looking at the evolution of Paul's story, Paul's legacy.
Yeah. Yep. There was another thing I wanted to say, and now I can't remember it. Darn it. I'll probably think of it tonight. After the Hangout's over.
What is so weak about the Abraham story? Faith breeding faith makes sense to me. Basically, what's the crux of why it's so weak is, yeah, Abraham's called because he's faithful, but what seals the deal of his faithfulness is his circumcision. Like, it's sort of like completely goes against Paul's meaning, like Paul's ultimate point that, you don't need circumcision because Abraham was justified by his faith in God, not his circumcision. And you just kind of go, I guess, but what seals the deal at the end of that story, their love for one another, their covenant, their faithfulness, is the circumcision, Paul. So I think you missed that part. Anybody else got any?
Yeah, I was going to say, what do you think, Wayne?
Yeah, you've been very quiet, Wayne.
You guys go back and forth so quickly, you just don't really have a chance to get in. But
interrupt us.
I haven't really had that much I wanted to add anyway, though.
Okay.
One thing, I need to read more of Jason Badoon's book.
Yeah.
It seems to be one of the best books on this topic that I've gotten my hands on so far. But just skimming through it, it actually surprises me a little bit of or the angle he's taking, but I haven't read it thoroughly enough to be certain. I think he's saying that a lot of the changes to the text that are supposedly like by Marcion actually predate his time. That Marcion's really just using a text that's been handed down to him for Luke.
Yeah, that's his argument. I read it briefly for my thesis on Marcion, but it wasn't really related to my topic. But that's his general thing, that Marcion is probably just getting the Bible he knows, pretty much.
Yeah. And I still think a lot of the Catholic redaction to it is later, though. But the dating of the Catholic redaction, I'm not sure how Jason Madoon argues for that. But I've always thought of that as mid to late 2nd century, though. But I don't know. I need to read it more.
Yes, it's on my wish list. Speaking of books we can read, like I posted on the forum, Joseph Hoffman's book, Marcion, on the Restitution of Christianity, is getting a 2nd edition, everybody. Yay!
Nice.
So
what's the gist of that book?
basically, the gist of Hoffman's thesis is that Marcion was not born when most scholars around the time of Harnack thought, which was about 100-ish.
Yeah.
He actually argues that Marcion was probably born around the year 70 because he thinks...
That much earlier?
Oh yeah, that's why his thesis was so groundbreaking. Because in some of... I think it's Clement? No, it can't be Clement. Somebody, I can't remember who. There's some writing, some letters, and Hoffman's thesis is he thinks those letters are fighting against Marcion and the Marcionites. And basically, the book is Marcion on the Restitution of Christianity, by Joseph Hoffman. But yeah, that's the general gist of it. He also goes through all sorts of things related to Marcion, like the Gnostic stuff being later, like mudslinging and Marcion's education and things like that. But I think his thesis is fundamentally wrong, which Sebastian Moll and others like Jerome Murphy O'Connor and others, I think, have just disproven completely. One of the main reasons is that the people who these people in these letters are arguing with, I just don't see them being Marcionites. They don't. It doesn't look like a Marcionite, doesn't smell like a Marcionite, so I don't know. You'll have to read the book. However, the thing that's exciting is Hoffman has said on Facebook today that he is making revisions. So he could be revising his argument. He could be taking on new criticism. He could be completely changing it. Who knows? So very exciting. I'm just excited that it won't be $90 on Amazon. Probably an actual book. I don't really know. I don't actually know when it's coming out, who's publishing it. He just announced it on Facebook, and that he was going to pop open a bottle of wine and celebrate. So it could be $40, but $40 is still a heck of a lot cheaper than $90. So yes, I dare say it'll come out on Kindle. Who knows? But even Kindle books are stupidly overpriced in the academic world. Frank would like to know if I've read Burton Max, Who Wrote the New Testament, and the answer is yes. I agree. It is engaging, but not convincing.
I haven't read it yet. Can you give me a quick summary?
That would have been really good to ask me like 5 years ago. uh, basically, that basically he really focuses on different competing. Okay, first of all, he focuses on similar stuff to like John Dominic Crossan and Hull Tarsing, that you basically have like at the start of Christianity, you have these like cynic-like philosophy movements, things like that, which get mixed into Judaism and Greco-Roman paganism, mystery cults, things like that. And that helps take off Christianity. Honestly, I'm not doing the book justice because I haven't read it in such a long time. Basically, it's sort of his crash course to the New Testament, like who wrote Mark and who wrote Paul and things like that. Who was Paul? But yeah, I really can't remember it well enough. You can get it pretty cheap these days. I know it represents sort of like the Westart Institute's sort of main thesis of New Testament sort of stuff, for the most part, anyway.
Thank you, Daniel.
You're welcome. Sorry I didn't really explain it very well, Wayne.
You know, that's a book I've heard that title over and over and over and over the years, and I never got around to reading it yet.
Yes.
Same with Crossan's books. Same with Crossan's books. I hear that name all the time and haven't read any of his stuff yet either.
Yeah, Crossan you've sort of got to read now because it's such a classic in the field, but it's really outdated. Like, yeah, in my opinion, some of Crossan's arguments I just can't follow. The fact that he argues that Jesus would have given up kosher, I don't know how he gets to that conclusion. I've read it 3 times and I still don't buy it. Although, which Crossan book are you talking about? The Historical Jesus?
I think so. I just heard the name a lot. I don't remember the book titles that much.
His big opus magnum is The Historical Jesus, The Life of a Mediterranean Jewish Peasant. That's his like big book on Jesus that basically put the historical Jesus, like that phrase, into Barnes and Noble.
Welcome back, Doug.
Thank you. Yeah, this is what I was looking at for. At the end of 2 Thessalonians, he says, "The greeting is by my hand, Paul's, which is a sign of genuineness in every letter. This is how I write." Like, see, look how I'm writing. It seems like protesting too much, you know, even naming himself. This is my hand, Paul's, you know, me.
Yeah, it does seem he's pushing too hard.
Don't you recognize my handwriting?
And it seems like he's just expecting the people to recognize what Paul wrote in the Galatians.
Well, what wouldn't surprise me, too, is someone wrote 2 Thessalonians and then had a copy of it, you know, and like, oh, well, you know, this isn't Paul's handwriting, but this is just a copy of the letter. But look right here, it says that the original was in his handwriting. So there we go. But it's a little fishy.
Yeah, it's like Bart Ehrman's book, Forgery and Counterforgery. It just really, I think, when he goes through forgery tactics of antiquity and looks at stuff like in Second Thessalonians,
It's exactly like
it has too many clues like that.
yeah.
Forgery writings, is that what we're talking
Yeah,
about?
it happens
Shane?
all the time. Yeah, it
Oh
happens.
yeah, oh yeah. Forgery was big business in the ancient world. Oh yeah, yeah. It is. That's one of the things Ehrman talks about. This has pretty much been known in the French biblical studies world and the German biblical studies world for a while, but in North America and England, uh, we haven't really caught on to this whole forgery stuff when it comes to it. But when you study like lots of the tactics, one of the things Ehrman and others have pointed out is one of the tactics is you say things like, look at my letters, look at this signature, or like you can tell that it's authentic by looking at ... And Ehrman goes through a lot of ancient forgery documents that we have, and we know are forgeries to spot the clues that are very similar to the things that are happening in the disputed letters of Paul. But yeah, the easy read for that, Shay, is forgery, writing in the name of God. But the big scholarly read is forgery and counter-forgery. Both are very good. If you want to put your toe in the water, I recommend forgery, writing in the name of God. But if you've got a lot of time in your hand and you really want to get into it, I would recommend forgery and counter-forgery.
Yeah, I read Forgery, and it's a good overview of the basic results, but he doesn't really get into the specific. I mean, he touches on it, but you're not going to get any other examples. I mean, he mentions one thing of some
Galen.
book, Galen, some book
Yeah,
where he
how to spot a fake Galen, pretty much.
right, because he was out in the some polis somewhere and saying some guy was selling a book supposedly by him. He's like, I never wrote that book.
Yeah. No, but that's the problem with the HarperCollins, mass paperback read.
Oh no, I get the book has a purpose and it has an audience for sure, but I think it's probably I haven't read it. I really want to. I bet Forgery and Counter Forgery is just chock more full of all the details like that you really love to hear.
Yeah, it's big. But if you're an audio guy, there's an audiobook version of it actually.
Yeah, which I've been thinking about getting. The other one that he did something similar like that was
Lost Christianities has an audiobook version.
Yeah, but there was one where he had like the popular edition and then the critical edition. The critical edition was the orthodox corruption of Scripture, and misquoting Jesus was the.
Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Same thing there.
Well, that seems to be what's happening with his one on oral tradition as well, and written tradition. It looks like he's starting with the popular book, and he says that he's getting really into it. So we might get a big fat book on tradition, Jesus' tradition in the early church later, which would be awesome.
I hope we do, yeah. I hope he continues to write like the scholarly version of all his popular works.
Yeah, me too. I love his popular stuff, don't get me wrong, but I really like to sink my teeth into the bigger stuff.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us are like really interested in the nitty-gritty detail of the whole line of argument. So
yeah, it's one of the reasons why I know this Hangout is in honor of Dr. Price in many ways, but I read some of his popular books. I haven't read many, but I've read a few, and I'm just like, okay, but let's get into the crux of the argument. So
Yeah, I think it's just a common practice,
Yeah.
To kind of dumb it down, if you will.
Yeah, and to be fair, Ehrman is a chair at a major university, so got to pay the bills.
Yeah, for sure.
I would not say Ehrman is a lightweight. That's like, I don't know where you get that from, Frank. He's just prolific, is what I would say. He's just a very prolific writer, and he writes a lot of mass-marketed books, but as somebody who reads his journal articles, as somebody who reads his big textbooks, particularly his peer-reviewed published stuff, he's an expert on papiology, that's for sure. But I will wait for your example with bated breath.
Yeah, I've always liked him as a scholar. I think he's thorough, like you said, he's got the popular books, which don't really go into a ton of detail, but they usually have a counterpart that's more developed.
Well, and like for example, like Doug, I don't think you're enrolled in a university or you have access to a journal. Like
No.
Some of the stuff he's written for, the Journal of Ancient Christianity, the Journal for New Testament Study, some of his stuff there. Yeah, this is what I mean. Like a lot of people don't see what Crossan and Borg and Ehrman, these people who seem to just produce mass market books. I'm like, well, hold on, guys. They are writing peer-reviewed stuff, I will give you an example of Spencer, which I've passed out on the scripture. I kind of follow where you're going, Frank, but in Ehrman's defense, Jesus, apocalyptic prophet of the new millennium, does go into many details why he supports the apocalyptic Jesus worldview. He does take it for granted these days, but he's written a whole book on that, so I suppose his little chuckle response would be, read my book on apocalyptic ending of the world Jesus. So I hear where you're coming from, but I think there's only so much you can do in a limited book space. You got any comments on that, Doug or Wayne?
Yeah, doesn't he just take the approach that it's doubtful automatically about all the stuff that Jesus supposedly said, but certain things he uses historical criteria, and well, why would anyone invent that he was predicting the end of the world? And then you also have the stuff like, well, look at the historical setting of Jesus in his time and in this place. Like there was a lot of apocalyptic fervor going around then,
Yeah, that's pretty much a lot of his stuff.
Yeah, Frank, I think it's clear that even in Paul's epistles and the Gospels that an imminent return is expected. I don't think he's making a leap, an unjustified leap there.
I think what I would say Ehrman's position is, Frank, is that the apocalyptic words are being put on the lips of Jesus after the fall of Jerusalem, but the apocalyptic character was there before, and that goes back to the historical Jesus. Ehrman is not one of these scholars who would say, oh, Jesus definitely said this, he didn't say that, he did say this. He doesn't really go back to that. He's more one of those people who says, like, what's Jesus' profile? And this sort of goes back to what I've been talking about on my blog for a while that begins to irritate me. Most historical Jesus scholars don't actually sit around all day and try to decide what's authentic, what's inauthentic about Jesus. What they try and do is profile him. And it doesn't really go beyond that. They want to know about his character, about his content, and that's about it. Like, it's not really this game of, did Jesus really go to Capernaum? Did Jesus really heal this person? Like, that's not really what historical Jesus scholars do. What they try and do is answer the question, what was Jesus like? What did he sound like? Not what he said, what he sounded like. Yeah.
Frank,
yes.
what do you... Frank, what
Sorry.
do you think of this stuff like the language in Matthew, where some of you standing here and this generation shall not pass and all that stuff? Like, what do you make of those things? Yeah, I actually agree with you. I mean, I think that Daniel was put there as an interpretation, like Daniel's. I mean, Daniel, the biblical Daniel, but our Daniel, who's here right now, I think had a good point about the specific words were probably put there afterward, but the apocalyptic character of Jesus, I don't think that's far-fetched at all. I mean, like I was saying, he lived in a time that was apocalypticism was just everywhere. The Romans were getting, well, especially starting in 66. But I mean, Israel was kind of fed up with the Roman rule, and they were kind of like, hey, it's getting pretty bad. I guess God's about to break into history. It must be soon now, because we're getting, we're under the thumb of the Romans. The Messiah must be on his way.
Yeah, I don't buy the present kingdom revelation stuff. That's been very pushed by people like Crossan and Borg. But
I think that stuff's not authentic.
well, I think that's not authentic as well. And I think, furthermore, I think that the way these biblical scholars read that, like the kingdom is all around us, I think they're misreading it, particularly within the canonical Gospels. It's not like, they particularly rely on the Gospel of Thomas, which I think is way later than they think it is. And I think the Gospel of Thomas relies on synoptics, not the other way around.
Yeah, I agree.
So.
The other thing that's convincing to me is, like, you have that thing in Luke where it's saying, the kingdom is in your midst, but men don't see it. There seems to be in the Gospels, in certain places, kind of a minimizing the parousia, or the imminence of the parousia tendency happening.
Yeah.
But there's also the stuff where it seems to be, hey guys, it's coming any minute now. I mean, these things are going to happen, and then guess what? Here's the end of the world. So when you have those things all together, it seems like some of the things are meant to be corrective of the other things. And if it's all just pure invention, I don't think you'd have those two opposing trajectories in the tradition there. You just have a consistent message.
Yes, and when you look at Paul as well, Paul clearly starts off with an apocalyptic fervor.
Totally, yeah, no doubt about it.
So I see that being fueled by the Jesus community. And
John the Baptist.
Oh yeah, exactly. These scenes, like they're playing for different teams, but they're all in the same playing field. The other thing I would say is that one of the reasons why I think the idea is Jesus as an eschatological Jewish prophet kind of goes back to Paul, where because Paul had such a hard time with like the Jerusalem community over things like kosher and circumcision, I think that just further adds, to the problem that the historical Jesus, the earthly Jesus, who these Jerusalem apostles seem to be talking about, kept kosher, promoted, the dominance of Israel and things like that, and would not have gotten rid of circumcision and Torah and kosher. But it's hard to say. One of the things that Michael Goulder has pointed out, which I think I'm starting to agree with, because I used to think Jesus must have been a strict Jewish prophet sort of figure who really promoted Torah and kosher and things like that. However, it seems that Paul was not the first person to be Torah free. That if Acts seems to suggest that there were these Hellenists who were before Paul, and also when you look at Galatians, when Paul goes to Antioch, Barnabas and the Antiochian community seem to already be practicing this Gentile Jew happy table fellowship before Paul arrives. So something that Goulder points out is that there probably was a tension in Jesus' apocalyptic message, where on the one hand you probably could get strict observance, but on the other hand it could probably be left to interpretation. So one of the things Goulder has suggested is maybe that idea of like all the Gentiles flocking to Israel may have been a part of his message in some way. So some people took that as Israel number one, the Gentiles will come to us and be at our footstool. But some people may have interpreted that as, oh no, the Gentiles will flock to Israel and they will finally see the God of Israel and things like that. So I think Goulder might be onto something. It's something that's just been on my brain a while, but yeah.
The other thing that's powerful to me is Albert Schweitzer's idea of the interim ethic. Some of the ethical teachings of Jesus seem to make most sense in the setting where we're living in an interim period. Sell all your possessions and give to the poor. If anyone slaps you, turn your face. Like, be ultra righteous. Don't worry about the cares of this world, because this world's passing away. Before it was an eye for an eye, but now, if someone slaps you in your face, turn to him the other cheek, because you have to be ultra righteous. The end is coming. The final judgment's coming.
Yeah.
It just seems like there's a very deep vein of this interim ethic going through the Gospels. And I think when you combine all these things we've mentioned, I think you can make a decent case. It's not certain by any means, but a decent case that there was an apocalyptic facet to Jesus' ministry. Then again, I'm very attracted to Brandon's theory of a more zealot with a small z idea. And I'm not against the thought that I've always thought that it was a combination of the two. I mean, there was an apocalyptic preacher, but also perhaps a revolutionary.
Well, like the two seem to go together pretty. When you read Josephus,
Totally.
Behind every zealot movement seems to be a hellfire preacher. So
exactly, yeah. That's one of the main reasons I think that the Brandon's historical Jesus and Schweitzer's historical Jesus aren't mutually exclusive by any means, not even close.
Yeah, the problem with all these theories comes with, and this is not me being a Christian apologist. It's the biggest mystery of Christian origins from a socio-historical point of view is how do you then explain the rise of Christianity? Like every other movement that was a zealot movement, that was an apocalyptic movement, fades away. They give up on their leader, they find a new one, or they just give up. So why is Jesus different? And it is the question. It's the fascinating question, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that, I'm not totally convinced of Brandon's idea. I think it's very compelling. He has a lot of good arguments. But I admit it's hard to square with the interim ethic turn the other cheek type of thing, too. I mean, but on the other hand, I think that, well, like Richard Carrier has a really good book about it's called Not the Impossible Faith.
Yeah.
And I think, because it was a response to some other guy's argument saying that, all of the odds were stacked against Christianity from the start.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how, other than, unless a miracle lies at the heart of Christianity, how do you explain its explosive growth? And I think he put that to rest really well. But the other thing too is it seems like, especially with Paul, there is like kind of a domesticating trend happening. I mean, Paul, the thing, I think it's in Romans, it says, obey all earthly authorities, for they're all put in place by God. Anyone who disobeys an earthly authority is disobeying God, and blah blah. It's like, whoa, okay. If a Roman asks you to carry his pack, carry it 4 miles or whatever. There's just this odd, like, over the top, pro-Roman, pro-establishment type of thing happening, even in parts of the Gospels too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look what John's Gospel does with his portrayal of Pilate.
Oh yeah. Luke as well.
Yeah.
But no, it's still that question of like, then how do we go? Like, because there's clearly something Larry Hurtado talks about in Lord Jesus Christ, devotion to Jesus in early Christianity, is that it's really clear from his studies, and I think Ehrman's added to this, that that Paul and the other early Christians probably worshipped Jesus in some capacity anyway. So how do we go from apocalyptic prophet to God? That's how do we get there? It's hard to think about. It's why I've started getting into the 2nd century. I don't have to think about it.
Yeah, but the other thing too, like Dr. Price has given some examples too, where I forget which one it is. Ruben will probably remember, but some movement where like the guy was claiming to be some other important figure, like reborn, and at some point he had gotten like captured by Muslims or something like that, and he converted to Islam. And did that end the movement? Heck no. They just said, oh, he just did it. Shabbatai Savi, yeah. No, they didn't deconvert. That didn't stop him at all. Even when your founder, your main man, converts to the other religion out of obviously just trying to save his skin, even that couldn't stop it.
Mm.
So sometimes these movements just have what would you call it? Like a hardiness, I guess, where I think a lot of things came into play in how Christianity caught on and spread. I think there was a lot of factors that probably came into play, but I don't think you could say it was any one thing that really launched it off.
Absolutely. It's very clear that I think it's clear anyway that Paul's conversion to Christianity, like conversion, whatever that means, Paul's joining the Jesus movement, I think that clearly marks a turning point.
In Christianity.
Yeah. In what will become Christianity anyway. But then by that same token, Justin Martyr writing his letters about how to engage with pagans is a turning point. The Council of Nicaea is a turning point. It's it just goes on and on and on. So it's interesting.
The other thing too is the destruction of the temple.
Oh yeah.
Was a big deal because, and I think this was even mentioned in Philip Harlan's thing, like, or maybe it was Dale Martin's, like, there were basically 2 forms of Judaism that emerged from the destruction of the temple: Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity, basically.
Yeah.
And I do think that the destruction of the temple helped Christianity out. personally. I think it.
Well,
I think
at the
it.
very least, it helps Pauline Christianity or Gentile
Yeah.
Christianity,
Yeah.
because without the Jerusalem church, that like it's sort of I really like what Joseph Campbell writes in Occidental mythology, in the Mask of God series, that in his chapter on Paul, the final line is, Paul may have lost the battle, but he'll win the war. Um, just he sort of played the long game almost, where the Jerusalem apostles seem to exercise authority almost in a pontifical way, which is really interesting, where James stays in Jerusalem and sends people out, and people come back to him. People seek him out in Jerusalem. He stays put. But then when Jerusalem falls, his power, his image, his legacy, like, all that's gone. Paul plays it riskier, but builds satellite communities across the empire. And it's tough to maintain, and clearly it's got its problems. But at the end of the day, it proves, Paul has a franchise. I like what Crossan says. James had a monopoly. Paul had a franchise.
The other thing too is I think that Paul, and maybe it wasn't him alone, but we know he played a big role for sure, at least. Him getting Christianity, even if say the original seed of Christianity was Jamesian, Petrine, Jewish Christianity, Paul broke it out and spread it into the Gentile world. And that was huge. I mean, that was a huge factor in its spreading. And you already had these righteous Gentiles who admired ethical monotheism. And now you have this guy, Paul, saying, hey, you guys can kind of be Jews, and guess what? You don't have to follow the law. You can be righteous in the eyes of God. This guy named Jesus died for you, and now you can be just as good as any Jew, and guess what? You don't have to follow the Torah. You can continue to be Gentiles. That was hugely attractive to people, I think.
Well, Paula Fredrickson talks about that, and Amy Gillevine in their books. And one of the things that they point out is Christianity is sort of like your have it cake and eat it too religion to a Roman. Because on the one hand, Judaism, despite what a lot of people think, Judaism was an ancient religion. And in the ancient world, if your religion was established and ancient and could go back to like the dawn of time sort of stuff, you had a bit of street cred. It's why the Romans were really interested in Egyptian religion when it became really popular and things like that. But on the other hand, they also were interested in these clubs, these communities, these mystery cults, these inner circles, these rites of initiation. They also
Christianity had it all.
Yeah, you had the roots of an ancient faith, but you kind of had the jazz of a select community. So that's something that Fredrickson and Gillevine point out that I really like. Sorry, Wayne. I feel like it's just been a Doug and Dan love fest tonight.
Yeah, Wayne.
I just haven't been very inspired to add much. It's not you guys' fault. It's just I'm just quiet tonight.
The spirit
has... Well, that being the case anyway, please, anyone at any time, feel free to just literally interrupt us if you want.
Absolutely. Please do.
Otherwise, we'll just keep going on all night.
Can I bring up the topic I wanted to pick a bone with, which might get Wayne moving, because I know he's interested in this. Maybe. Okay. This is related to my blog, so I'm sorry to make it about me, but I am so sick whenever I write something about...
With big letters?
With very big letters. Many letters, more than big letters. The question gets, like, for example, I wrote my post on Mary Magdalene, and immediately the first response was, how do you even know Mary Magdalene existed? I wrote my post on Thecla, and it's like, are there any evidence that Thecla existed? And it's just like I wrote my article on the apostles, and it's just like it seems to me like the apostles didn't exist, and it's just like guys, I'm like,
Well, you know, Daniel, you have kind of latched on to the Bible Geek community.
I get that.
This isn't the SBL.
No, I get that. I just want to.
I don't believe Mary Magdalene existed, so I think this is hilarious.
No, but here's my thing. This is what I want to make the point clear, saying I'm not saying she existed. I don't know, to be honest. I think it's impossible to know either way. But it's one of the, and even if she did or didn't, she's just. I hate to break it to people. She's just not that important. She's an important, like, iconography figure. What's the word? She's an important mythological figure in the richest sense of the word.
Wait, are you saying she's not the co-redemptrix?
No, she's not.
I hope no Catholics are listening.
That's Jesus' mother, not Mary Magdalene.
Oh, what am I thinking of? Yeah, sorry.
Fail.
Yeah, I just heard Mary.
Like things like. But the point I want to make, Wayne, is this is not the sort of thing scholars debate. Because it just doesn't really matter. And the thing I wanted to talk about is when
it was tangential to the point you were trying to make, that discussion of whether she existed.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree with you, Frank. She matters because she's in the text. What scholars do is they read the world behind the text. Where did these stories come from? Who wrote them? Why do they come the way they are? Did they exist? That is a valid question. In the middle, what's the world in the text? How does Mary Magdalene function as a character? What's her symbolism? What's her character arc? What are the dramatic ironies and things like that? And the world in front of the text, what does it mean for us today? What does it mean for feminist scholars? What does it mean for like Jesus films and art and poetry and things like that? And you may notice in that the question of, did she exist? Well, she didn't, therefore she's useless and we shouldn't talk about her anymore. Like, that's just not what people do.
Mm-hmm.
Just had to get that off my chest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Like, if you're talking about a character within these stories, you kind of have to put yourself in the universe of these stories. If that's the purpose of the discussion, you're not just gonna, if you write an article about, say, Peter or something, and how he seemed to, in the Gospel of Mark, he always seemed to misunderstand Jesus. Oh, how do you know Peter even existed? Yeah, I totally see what you mean. Like,
yeah, it's tangential to the point.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not related to the point.
Well, it's one of those things I sort of add with the historical Jesus thing, where scholars don't sit around debating, did Jesus do this? Did Peter really say this? What they really try and do is profile more than and profile may not even be the right word. It's like, okay, we have these little tiddly bits about Peter in the Gospels. Paul says these sorts of things. What sort of person was Peter? You could write about 3 sentences on it, in terms of, it's just not one of the things we can do,
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you.
And Thecla, it's like, yes, Thecla probably never existed. We have no evidence for her existence. But isn't it fascinating that there was this woman apostle in the middle of the 2nd century who was really popular with some early church fathers, but hated by a few others, and she had these really empowering stories, and that in these stories the apostle Paul blesses her to be an apostle and preach and teach, and that in the 5th century she has a whole cult around her where women are giving up their livelihood to be inspired by this woman? Isn't that really interesting? No, she didn't exist. It's like...
Yeah, I feel your pain there, yeah.
Thanks, Wayne.
But I think the whole question of whether certain characters existed or not is only really relevant. I mean, even in the case of Jesus and Paul, it's only relevant when we're tying it to questions of how the stories about them have come to us. I mean, in the origins of the stories.
Yeah, I agree.
So if you're not addressing that kind of point, then yeah, the question's superfluous.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like with the whole Mary Magdalene thing, it's like this is sort of my position. I don't see why she didn't exist. Like one of the things that makes me skeptical is that she's not mentioned. She's not mentioned by Paul, but then Paul doesn't really mention that many people anyway. And he moves around so much that he doesn't mention anyone from Palestine, really. All of his people are from the Greco-Roman Empire. However, she's in all of the Gospels, and she seems to play. She's even in the Gnostic Gospels, blah, 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 so that's interesting. Okay, so what do these Gospels say? Well, it says that she followed Jesus around, and she was one of the first people to see the resurrection, and according to Luke, she had money.
Yeah, I think in the Gospel of Mark there's a pattern of reversals, but it's been a while since I've studied this, so I can't list a bunch off the top of my head. But that's one of these reversals where Jesus starts out with one Mary, his mother, and then ends up hanging out with a different Mary at the end of the story. And that needs to be looked at in the context of everything in the Gospel being reversed from the beginning to the end.
Oh yeah, and I agree, and that's I think it's like Simon of Cyrene and Simon Peter. One doesn't carry his cross, the other does, ironically, and yeah, the other Mary anoints Jesus' feet with her tears and things like that. Where the other Mary thinks that he's insane and should be locked away. So I definitely see, and right there, what we're talking about is the world in the story. We're talking about the literary functions, and to some degree, the theological significance for Christians, what they can learn from it, what we can learn from it as well. But in terms of historical significance, it's not like, did Mary actually wipe Jesus' feet? It's like, okay, did she exist? Maybe, maybe not. I think she did, but I don't invest too much in that. It doesn't really, I think she existed because she's mentioned enough for me to think she did. But if it was proven beyond a doubt she didn't exist, to me it's like, wow, that's even more fascinating that this woman invented by Mark or somebody rose to such prominence in certain communities. Isn't that fascinating? I'm rambling with my irritation.
Yeah, I don't think the question of whether Adam existed is really relevant to the question of whether humanity should be seen as being fallen.
Yeah.
And that's the same kind of thing here.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's really interesting because in a debate I had with somebody about the mythical Jesus, one of the reasons why I think Paul does believe in a historical Jesus, I said that Paul uses figures like Adam and Abraham and David, and I think Paul, in his mythological framework, believed these people were historical people. And the person I was debating with says, do you really believe Adam existed? And I'm like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying Paul probably believed Adam existed, but even Paul believing Adam existed isn't just a fact for Paul. It still is drenched with theological significance for Paul. Yeah, you hear what I'm saying, Wayne?
Yeah. That's why I don't care about the Harry Potter movies, because we know Harry Potter never actually existed, so we can just ignore those movies.
Yeah, why bother reading them?
Why bother reading any piece of literature?
Yeah.
It's sort of my ultimate problem with Ancient Aliens. I have many problems with Ancient Aliens, of course, But one of the things that I think is one of the things that's bad with Ancient Aliens is the pseudoscience and things like that. But I think what's insulting is what it says about humanity's culture. That basically humanity has no culture. It's all influenced by that. We have no imagination. We have no creativity. We have no deep thoughts about what is beautiful, what is dark, what is scary. No, it's all to do with this.
And we're all just aping alien ideas.
Yeah.
So, do you think the pastorals are a response to Paul and Thecla?
Dennis MacDonald's book. I think they could be.
Can you clarify your question for me?
Well, in Paul and the Acts of Paul and Thecla, it's promoting like an anti-family, pro-woman kind of agenda, whereas in the pastorals, it's more pro-family, anti-woman.
Shut up the church, woman. I do not permit a woman to preach or teach.
Right. Yeah, all that stuff.
But Thecla, Paul says, through Thecla, go teach the word of God. So Dennis Ronald MacDonald from Claremont, his book, The Legend of the Apostle, makes the argument that the pastorals are directly, Thecla has come out, and the pastorals are directly responding to it. I don't exactly buy it. I think they could be, but I think they could be multitasking. Maybe Thecla is one of the things they're doing, trying to get rid of. Yes, and you're right, David. Thecla even has the audacity to baptize herself in the arena when the lions are about to get her. She says, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I baptize myself." It's a wonderful scene. Anybody who hasn't read the Acts of Paul and Thecla really should. It's the one book I'm sad did not make it into the New Testament. It's such a great read, and there would be some cracking sermons, particularly when Paul talks of the talk of the lion.
I wish it was in there instead of the pastorals.
Does Christ have that in his Pre-Nicene New Testament or not?
Maybe.
I'd be surprised if he didn't, because he talks about that story.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, he does.
I'm pretty sure he does.
Yeah, it's near the end. I found it.
It's pretty late, I think.
It's generally dated. The oral tradition has been dated towards about 120. The written form is probably dated to about 150, although some people have argued for 160. And because I am a shameless whore, and that's what I wrote about today, here is my small 800-word introduction.
I was like, what?
Yeah, it's my small little introduction to it. So you can read that and get a good sense of what people think about it.
Thank you.
Because I am a shameless self-plugging.
Don't worry about it. We like reading
You're a well of knowledge, so we enjoy your constant flowing out.
I don't want to ghostwrite for Dr. Price. I'm just saying.
Gotcha.
I'm just saying that the throne cannot be full forever. And I couldn't ghostwrite for Dr. Price. We have very different senses of humor. And I'm boring compared to what Dr. Price thinks.
2 questions for you, Daniel.
Shoot, Wayne.
Do you like H.P. Lovecraft?
I love H.P. Lovecraft.
Do you like South Park?
I enjoy it, but I don't watch it religiously. If it's on, I'll watch it.
Price hates it.
Okay.
I love the thing. I'll never forget this. Someone had mentioned the South Park episode, and one of their questions, and Dr. Price is like, at first they mentioned it, and Dr. Price is like, oh, I don't really like South Park. So then later on, the person wrote in again a different question. But before they asked the question, they had a preamble about trying to defend South Park essentially. And Dr. Price is like, yeah, I get what you're saying. Maybe there's some good stuff. He's all, I'm not going to dig through the garbage heap to try and find the gems. I was just cracking up. I'm not going to wade through the garbage to find the gems. I was cracking up. And that's me being a huge fan of the show. I was still laughing my head off.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan, but like it's my favorite episode is the Peter Rabbit one for the Da Vinci Code. Oh, that's so good.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, it's great. Basically, it just like makes so much fun of that Da Vinci Code hype and equates the Pope with Peter Rabbit, which like the Vatican is trying to hide that really the first apostle to be named by Jesus wasn't a man, but a rabbit. And it's like, see the Pope's hat? What do you see? It's a silly.
Somebody has to do it.
It's like and it's like a little it's like it turns it into rabbit ears and like
it's such a brilliant parody of the Da Vinci Code.
Oh, you've got to watch it. It's brilliant. The parody is just.
Do you know what season that was?
Or do you remember the name of the episode?
Peter Rabbit's Da Vinci Code. I'm probably gonna Google it and I'll get it straight away. Fantastic Easter Special. Here we go. It's the 138th episode. It's from Season 11, Episode 5.
Thanks. And I didn't mean to change the subject too much. I would just...
Oh, that's all right.
How qualified you were to step in Price's shoes.
I'm not qualified enough. My biblical views are too mundane. That's why I will never write a bestseller. Two of my views are too mainstream. I gotta think Jesus was married or something. Although I am working on something, possibly. Yes, I am working on the Marcion book that's to come. Although I might be working on something with Zimmer.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool.
Maybe. I don't know how much I can talk about because I've only just proposed the idea to him.
Oh yeah, don't spill the beans if you can't.
Well, I don't know if I can. I just.
Err on the side of caution.
Yeah.
I still got some questions on my mind from reading the Parables of War in the Book of Revelation. But some of my questions have nothing to do with what John Marshall was talking about and just other things in Revelation. And I'm still curious, though, what are the best explanations that have been suggested for why the author of Revelation is addressing his letters to just 7 churches in Asia Minor and not to the abundance of other Christian churches, or he's not Christian, but I mean the other Jewish groups like that around the whole area. It just seems really limited geographically, and I wonder if there's a reason for that. How come the church in Corinth isn't addressed in Revelation in the letters to the churches?
Not Jewish enough.
I thought about it. I thought about asking. I don't know if Dr. Price had read the book we just read, but I thought about asking about kind of basically giving him a really brief summary of the main arguments and just saying, "Hey, what do you think about it?"
Do that, Doug.
I don't know if he's ever read the book.
Yeah. I'm thinking maybe the writer of Revelation really was tied to that group and thought the other groups really just weren't proper. I mean, those were the only 7 churches that are actually, teaching the truth or something.
It's possible.
That's pretty much what Bauer thought. Bauer thought that it was that the other churches were just heretical, Pauline Gentile churches who were going to go to hellfire.
By the way, Reuben, what did you think of the book, Reuben, if you read it? I don't know if you did. You heard us discuss it, at least. parables of war.
Yeah, I wish I could join you guys for that stuff, but it's just too late for a Sunday in Kansas.
Well, I was actually gonna talk about that, but I didn't want to do it on the Bible Geek podcast.
Okay. Maybe if I get into a grad school with central with Pacific time, everyone will be happy. Well, guys, it is 10 to 11, so it's very late for me. So I probably should hit the hay.
Okay, I'll talk to you later about the thing with the other group.
Yes.
Always enjoy having you here, Daniel.
Yep.
Thank you, Wayne. Always enjoy getting poked and prodded by you guys and poking and prodding back. I can't think of a better way to talk about all the stuff that fascinates us and bores our wives to tears.
Yep.
And just a shout out to listeners, if anybody has any advice for me with American grad schools, applications and things like that, please feel free to shoot me an email. Yeah, it would just be really good to help this Australian navigate what they're looking for and what they're not looking for. Particularly if you're on the inside at Yale or Harvard or a fancy theological college, I'd really appreciate any help. Thanks, guys.
Good talking to you, Daniel. See you later.
See ya.
Frank, Matthew's my favorite gospel. How could you say that? I don't know. I like John a lot too, though.
I like Mark.
That's why it's so good.
The most primitive of them.
Yeah, I like Mark, but I haven't read that much about it. There seems to be more to it than I know. Like the whole reversal thing, that was new to me. That's really interesting. If you can find where you said you hadn't read it in a while, or where did you find out where that came from? Let me know, because I'm interested in reading about it.
I know R.G. Price refers to the reversal stuff in his
book. Is that the thing where the whole thing's a parable? Okay, I still have that saved. Yeah, I haven't read it yet.
But there's other scholars who don't necessarily follow R.G. Price's thesis that still point out reversals in Mark. I mean, that's a commonly recognized theme.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wonder if I just started the John Dominic Crossan book about the parables, and I wonder if he'll address that thing with the entirety of Mark possibly being a parable.
Maybe. That's another. I think the book you just mentioned, the author's name just went right through my head after you just said the author's name.
John Dominic Crossan.
That was Crossan? I thought that was somebody else. Okay. Okay.
That's right, Frank. Yeah.
What was the title of that book then? Is it the same one? Is it the same one that Bredar was advertising?
Something parable, something. The Power of Parable.
Yeah, that is the same one that Bredar had a lot of good things to say about.
Yeah. I actually got it off. I got it because Carrier talked about it very highly and recommended it very highly. So I'm like, well, may as well read it. It's cheap, it's short, it's Crossan.
I haven't read any Crossan before, so that would be my first time.
Yeah, this is my first Crossan book too. So
I've always heard other people tell what Crossan says, but never actually heard Crossan explain himself.
Crossan's way out there. I mean, he's got some really out there ideas for sure. But I like reading him. I'm not sure, David. Wouldn't surprise me. He probably has some weird Kuhnian type of thing if he is. Panentheists? What I don't even know what that is. guess I could Google it.
Yeah, I've seen that term before, but I'm forgetting what it means.
Panentheism, or panentheism, is a belief system which posits that the divine, whether as a single god, number of gods, or other form of cosmic animating force, interpenetrates every part of the universe and extends timelessly and presumably spacelessly beyond it. Oh, so like God is everything, God is all, God is, it's like the force. It surrounds us. It's within us.
Yeah, I forget what the actual detail is that makes it different from regular pantheism. So maybe Frank will enlighten us.
Frank, you should get a mic. We love to hear from people who say they're unclassifiable. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, David. Like, isn't it just Spinoza's God essentially? Kind of
Oh,
a
so panentheism is supposed to be what pantheism used to be, but before he liked Spinoza and then stole the terminology. Okay. It still seems a lot like the old Logos theology, though. Not much different.
David, I'm still reading through Life of Jesus by Strauss, or listening to it. I'm reading still A Myth of Innocence, Burton Mack's book. I just started Power of Parable, and I also just started last night, in fact, the book we're going to be reading for the SOB Hangout, the Bible Unearthed. You go to the store and buy one, Frank.
Yeah, I finished the Parables of War for the other Hangout, but I was also with that reading Bruce J. Molina's on the genre and Message of Revelation. But I'm going to set that aside for a while. It wasn't really what I was expecting, and it's an enjoyable book, but there's other things I want to get to. I need to get the book for the next Hangout. I haven't started on it yet, the Bible Unearthed. And also, if I can make some extra time, I want to really prioritize finally getting to Jason Madoon's book.
Yeah.
It's just really high on my list because he covers issues that I have lots of questions about.
Just take 30 minutes of your day every day and read part of it. You know?
I need to get myself more disciplined. These Hangouts are actually helping me get more disciplined on my reading.
Yeah, me too. I feel the same way. It's kind of like a constant well of motivation.
Well, having deadlines to get certain things read kind of helps.
Yeah, the SOB is big time for that. SOB Hangout's big time for that.
Yeah.
Do you recommend that, Frank? Myth and Human History from the Teaching Company, Grant Voth. Oh, you just started. Okay. Well, let me know when you are further along or finish it. I got a bunch that I just recently got that I really needed too, because there are areas I really need a basic brush up on. I'm trying to set all from Teaching Company too. History of Ancient Egypt by Professor Bob Breer, and this one seems to be people seem to love it, so I'm really excited to start on this one. Everyone just says it's really comprehensive. And then Alexander the Great and the Macedonian Empire, Greece and Rome, an integrated history of the ancient Mediterranean, great ancient civilizations of Asia Minor, Dead Sea Scrolls, history of Christianity in the Reformation era, and history of Christian theology. And then a bunch by Ehrman. What's what called, Frank? I rattle off a bunch of them. Oh, the first, it was an audiobook from the teaching company called, hold on. Oh yeah, The History of Ancient Egypt by, narrated by Professor Bob Breer. It's almost 25 hours total, and I read the reviews and like everyone's like, whoa, 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 this is just amazing. It's super comprehensive, and you'll know a ton about ancient Egypt after you listen to it.
So, Doug, are you finding a lot in that helps enlighten you on biblical studies, or is it just a secondary interest?
Both. It's a secondary interest, and just because I'm interested in the Bible, I want to learn more about the ancient world in general.
Gotcha.
And because there's so many, there's so much interrelatedness, especially between the Old Testament and ancient Near Eastern religions in general, that yeah, I just kind of want to learn more about all of it.
So is there something about the Old Testament that you've changed your understanding of because of your studying of the history of Egypt?
Oh no, I haven't started on the Egypt thing yet.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, okay.
Although another book I was reading that Daniel recommended that I got that I've just been flipping through, because it's that kind of a book. It doesn't have like a narrative structure. It's just examples all put together. Was I forget what it's called, Parallels in the Bible, something like that. Old Testament Parallels. And there's a ton of stuff from ancient Egyptian religion
That's fascinating.
that ends up in the Old Testament. And obviously from Babylonian, Sumerian. Did you get the name of it, Frank? Okay, cool. Yeah, so I just want to learn about that time period, basically, and in that region, because I don't know nearly enough about it.
I don't either. And then you'd be more prepared to get into debates with D.M. Murdoch.
Yeah, I want to read some of her books, but you know, Dr. Price seems to like her a lot, but she does seem to come under a lot of criticism too. But I don't want to judge her based off of that. I want to give her a fair shake and read what she has to say. Because I'm not at all opposed to the idea that, you know, like astronomical concepts play a big role in ancient religion. I think that's undeniable.
Yeah, my problem with her stuff is not that her stuff is flawed in its own, in its own case. I mean, she brings up lots of interesting parallels and things. Although some of it with linguistics and stuff, it's always questionable whether they're just coincidental or not.
Yeah.
But the issue I have is that there just seems to be other explanations that I just find more compelling. I mean, the approach that Doherty and Carrier take, I just find more compelling. And like Murdoch deals with the talk about Lazarus in the Gospel of John, and she relates that to some more ancient myths and things. But I'm sorry, but I'm with Carrier that John is just rewriting what's already been in Luke. Just taking
the parable of Lazarus, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just, which is the best explanation kind of thing. And I just...
Yeah, that's a good point. Of course, maybe she would argue that even the thing in Luke was a parallel of something. I don't know. I don't know what her argument is.
Yeah.
Could be a chain of custody there. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
Luke got it from somewhere. John borrowed from Luke and kind of put it into a historical, non-parable form.
Maybe, but I don't think Luke's version has that close of a parallel to the ancient stuff that seems parallel with St. John. I haven't
Yeah,
studied it enough myself to know, but
I agree, Frank.
mm.
It's not one or the other.
But basically, kind of what Price calls an embarrassment of riches. We have too many good explanations of some things.
Exactly, and that should tell you something.
Yeah.
That fact alone should be hinting at something. There's either something wrong with the methodology or something's going on when you have that happening.
Yeah. But yeah, but both her book, Christ in Egypt, and Did Moses Exist, seem to be well worth going through from what I've heard.
Okay.
I don't know about her other books, if they're redundant, if you read those two or not, I don't know. I know that
I've not read any of her stuff.
Yeah, I have the only one I have of hers right now is the first edition of the Christ Conspiracy, which I bought years ago, then never got around to reading. Well, I read a few chapters, never finished it. But I've heard so many criticisms of that I'm almost scared to read it because I don't know if I want to get questionable stuff stuck in my head.
You're talking about Myth of Innocence, right, Frank? Oh, well, Bert, I don't know if you know, but Bert and Mac's book, A Myth of Innocence, is all about the Gospel of Mark, specifically. Like, I know he has that book, the first edition of the New Testament, or whatever it's called. Or am I getting that mixed up with Badune? I don't remember. But Myth of Innocence is all about the Gospel of Mark. Yeah, who wrote the New Testament? Yeah. You might want to, I don't know if you want to, but his other book is just all about Mark, A Myth of Innocence.
I should look at that one then, yeah.
So yeah, he'll go into way more detail than whatever he talks about in Who Wrote the New Testament, which I haven't read. And I haven't finished A Myth of Innocence either. I'm about a third of the way through it, so I'm not judging it yet.
Yeah, one thing that I came across by my looking at R.G. Price's writings, which we were talking about earlier here a little bit, is that he seems to just be rehashing what other authors have written. But on this,
A lot of people do that.
on R.G. Price's stuff on Mark, I just don't know who it is he's rehashing.
Mm-hmm.
Or, how much of this is R.G. Price's original input, and how much is stuff he's retelling? Because he doesn't really give. He gives biblical references, but he doesn't really give references to other scholars. And he barely even mentions Doherty. I don't even know if he mentions Doherty or not. I can't remember. Even though it's obvious he's parroting from Doherty.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't read him, and I have no idea who his sources are.
So I'm wondering if maybe some of it is from Mac or Crossan. That would be awesome if it was.
Mm-hmm. R.G. Price.
He has a website called rationalrevolution.net. Most of what he talks about is political stuff, but he has 3 or 4 articles on the Christ myth theory and the Gospel of Mark and other things regarding the New Testament. He's not related to Robert M. Price, so I always say R.G. every time I say it, so I'll make that clear. Yeah, it is confusing. But he has an article that I thought was really fascinating. Well, book-length article, but it's all online. Maybe a different edition than what's in print. Called The Gospel of Mark as Redaction and Allegory. I do not know what Robert M. thinks of RG. No idea. Never asked him.
I wonder if he even knows about him.
Yeah.
One time he was saying that. Oh, has he? Because one time he was saying, there's a couple other Robert Prices. One is like a NRA fanatic or into guns or something like that. Another one's like a fishing fanatic or something like that. I forget.
I also think R.G. Price is a leader of an atheist group like in Texas or something, but my memory may be wrong about that. And I need to start reading my Bible more so I can get more questions for her.
Yeah, that's the other thing I've been. I think I'm just going to be reading or listening to that because I have the NASB, which is my favorite translation, in audiobook, and I think I'm just going to continually listen to that. Like if I'm in the mood for the New Testament, I'll do New Testament, or vice versa for the Old Testament. Frank, if you have a webcam, you should be able to activate it. You're seeing us, right, Frank? Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, Wayne. I don't think it would work. Do you know if you have a webcam, Frank? Are you like on a laptop or are you on a desktop? Okay. Most laptops nowadays, if you look at the top, it'll have a little camera up at the top on the bezel. And most of them have webcams nowadays, just automatically built in. And they usually have mics, too. So you should be able to speak if you wanted to. How old is it? How many years ago did you buy it? Or how long ago? 10 years? Okay, yeah, that's way too long.
My 7-year-old laptop does not have a microphone or video camera on it, but the successor model came out the year later does. So yeah.
Yeah, that's probably too old, Frank. I doubt it has either one.
There's another thing in these Hangouts too that is really nice to be using headphones, because if you don't, your own voice comes back through the speakers, goes back into your mic again, goes back to the speakers and back to your mic again, and just makes a really awful echo.
Yep. I consider headphones a courtesy.
Yeah.
Good point, Ruben.
There's lots of USB microphones and headsets and video cameras.
Yeah,
I got a desktop machine, but I'm just using a USB video camera here, webcam.
Frank, this is a Logitech. I think you can see the model on there. Nope, it's not on there. There's a really cheap Logitech. It's like $30-something on Amazon headset, and it's USB, so all you have to do is plug it in, install the drivers, and it's good to go. And then as far as a webcam, you can just take your pick. There's a ton available, and you want the kind that's going to attach like to the top of a screen, and it'll attach to a laptop just as easily as a desktop monitor. So if you want that, really all you need on Hangouts is is your mic. That's what everyone really likes. If you have a mic, webcam doesn't really matter.
Yep. I'm actually using a microphone that came with my motherboard. My microphone's actually on my speaker here, but there's the stereo microphone that came with an Asus motherboard.
That's the mic you're using right now?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I have it mad level on my center speaker for my computer system, but the speaker is quiet because I'm using headphones instead, so it doesn't interfere with the mic. It's just a good place to mount it.
Gotcha. Well, anyone got anything else?
I just opened this Bible to a random page and found a question.
Women at the tomb. What do I think about it? I don't know. Like, who was there? Is that what you mean? Or the fact that there were women there? Or what? What are you asking? Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. When it comes to the most of the passion narrative, I think a lot of it's fiction. But again, all these things are so speculative. There's no way to really know. Yeah, the whole argument that why would anyone make up the fact that there were women there, I don't buy that at all. I think that's an argument that's been defeated too many times by multiple people. Yeah, specifically in regards to their testimonies, a lot of people have addressed that. The other thing too is wasn't it a Jewish custom for the women to go anoint the dead?
Yeah, so I think they're just there because it's more likely they'd be the first people to discover the empty tomb.
Right, because that was common Jewish practice. I'll have to look up specifically the one I remember, but basically it had to do with the fact that there actually isn't good historical evidence to support the notion that women's testimonies were like, not really listened to or dismissed or, not worth as much as a man's testimony. Let me see if I can find exactly what I'm thinking of.
Richard Carrier discusses that in one of his books.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm remembering it from.
Probably
do you remember
not
which book
the
it is?
Colossal Faith.
Yeah.
I haven't read Not the Impossible Faith yet, but it sounds like the kind of thing that's most apt to be there.
Yeah, I think that's the one.
Here's an article on it that's not in the book, but it's probably the same thing that's in the book, Frank. Yeah, that's by Richard Carrier, that article I linked to you on that exact topic. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and the other thing, Reuben can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was some kind of a Jewish custom to have women go anoint a recent deceased. So that's probably the main reason they would put him there, even if it was an invention. I like his books, David. Not the Impossible Faith was, I thought, excellent. Like, if you've ever wondered about that argument that how could Christianity have spread so quickly unless Jesus really did rise from the dead, and you know, at Pentecost all the people saw him. Unless that's all true, there's no other way to explain the rise of Christianity. I think Carrier just completely puts that notion to bed, like I said, puts it to rest. Oh, Reuben, you do think Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene, huh? Now, do you think he had children with her? Oh, interesting. Okay. Reuben says no. He thinks she was married to her, but they never consummated the marriage.
Theories are nice, but what evidence are you building this theory on?
You talking to me?
Mainly to Reuben, actually, but. And women not speaking in church, for one, that's controversial in itself how widespread that was. There's other Christian documents that have lots of instances of women speaking in church. Even in Paul, there's other instances. But
Yeah.
the other thing, is it just really isn't relevant to how good their testimony is. I mean, there's context where, it may be seen as more formal to just have the men speaking there, but it doesn't mean that outside that context, their testimony is not still seen as valuable. I just kind of see that as irrelevant to it.
Yeah, and on the thing with the women can't speak in church, I think those are obviously like later church establishment interpolations, and the pastoral, same thing. Like in 1 Corinthians, you got Paul saying, here's, women, go ahead, you can prophesy and speak in the church, but you got to wear a head covering because of the angels, wink, wink. But then a couple chapters later, or maybe it's the next chapter, I don't remember, chapter 12 or something like that, it's like, women can't speak in church, period. So yeah, something's going on there weird. Those are not authentically Paul.
Well, I think it just has to do with the formality that's for the church setting. It's part of the decorum there, I guess. It doesn't mean...
Are you talking about the head thing or the fact that they can't even speak in church?
Both.
Well, I think the head thing is Paul. I think that's Paul.
I'm not saying it's not. I'm saying, it's just talking about decorum and stuff in the church and stuff. But it has nothing to do with how reliable they are as witnesses.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, he explicitly says that the reason they need to cover their heads is because they have to. They don't want it. He doesn't want them to arouse the angels. The angels, just like in Genesis, you don't want the angels to come down and breed with the sons of men and create more Nephilim. Can't have more Nephilim taking over the earth and ruining everything. Yeah, I think that's right too, Frank. I think rabbi, just the fact that they use it, that shows a later, much later dating of the writing of the Gospels. Reuben says you might actually the denigration of her, that's Mary Magdalene, her character, making her into a Madam Magdala. You might wish to drag her through the mud if you want to disqualify her as his wife. But the key, so he's saying that's why there seems to be that phenomena in the Gospels. But the key thing here is that you can't be a rabbi without being married. So if Jesus was a rabbi, as Peter explicitly says, he would need to be married, at least as far as people outside the inner circle are concerned. So in other words, Jesus was married to conform to appearances, I guess. But Matthew wants us to think Jesus was a rabbi in good standing. No. Oh, you're so lucky, Frank. Frank says he moved to a town next door to Yale. I envy you.
They have free lectures there? I didn't know that.
Yeah, heck yeah. A lot of universities do.
Hmm.
If a big time star comes into town, sometimes they'll have a door price, but usually they're free.
Oh, you don't mean actual class lectures. You mean like special seminars and stuff. Okay.
Yeah, seminars, but you can even, a lot of times you can go and sit in a classroom. They don't care. A lot of
Wow.
teachers don't even take attendance.
Wow.
Yeah, you can go sit in a class. Most professors probably won't care. I mean, you're not going to get a grade or anything.
Gotcha, yeah.
Some maybe might have a problem with it. I don't know, but usually they don't care. So we need to get Frank a mic, and Reuben a mic, and David a working mic, and then we'll be good.
One of these days I should show you a picture of how my camera is propped up. It's actually, the mount for it is really ridiculous. I don't understand how the base for it is supposed to work in any context. Just some ridiculous spider kind of shaped thing, but it doesn't actually fit anything. It doesn't actually, stand straight or anything. But I have it sitting on top of a peanut container on top of another peanut container to get it up high enough on my desk to have a good angle.
Oh yeah.
So it's like just wobbling a little bit.
Yeah, mine just has a little bracket underneath that sits on top of the monitor, and then it has a little weighted arm that presses against the back of the monitor and keeps it upright.
Mine's
Yeah,
probably. I also got a shelf above my monitors, so I don't have any room to mount a camera on the top of the monitors.
Oh, okay. I mean, it's like right above it, because mine's like maybe an inch tall at the most.
No, my shelf is right above it. These monitors barely fit this desk. I got a 1/4 inch of clearance.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you don't have it.
Yeah. But I got dual monitors here and my cameras between them. So just like my eyes go to either side of the camera all the time. We're still live, aren't we? Maybe we should talk about something else while we're live.
Are you talking to me, Frank? Oh, I'm drinking Colonel E.H. Taylor straight rye whiskey.
Water. Sorry to disappoint you.
It's not water, it's vodka.
That's one of my running gags, though. When I go to a restaurant, they have pitchers of water out for people to use. I always pour it and taste it. And I'm always disappointed it's not vodka. The tap water here is good, so yeah.
My tap water is horrible. Tastes like pool water. I mean, you literally like you fill a cup up out of the tap, and you can just smell like the chlorine smell coming off of it. It's horrible.
And that's also a misunderstanding. Chlorine's actually odorless. You can't smell it. They have to actually add chemicals in it to let you smell it. But what you actually smell from a pool and stuff, when it smells too much like chlorine, is actually when there's too little chlorine. It's actually not killing the bacteria well enough, so you're actually smelling other stuff that the chlorine's supposed to be clearing out. Yeah.
Now I'm even more worried.
Exactly. Yep.
Wow. Well, anyone got any Bible stuff? Bible-related stuff?
Do you think Job was written by an atheist?
Do I think Job was written by an atheist? No.
I heard that suggested once. I never heard what the argument was for it.
It seems really far-fetched.
Yeah, I don't remember who brought that up. It was actually seriously proposed somewhere, but I don't remember where.
Ruben, you do have a good sense of humor, I have to admit. You have a similar sense of humor to me, except you're way more creative. And you have a better imagination. But I have a feeling we would laugh at a lot of the same similar things.
I didn't come here to break the rules. They were already broken before I came in.
Didn't you use that joke a while ago?
I don't think so.
Or maybe I heard it from somewhere else.
It was going around Facebook for a while. That's where I got it.
Oh, okay. Well, Ruben, should we shut down the live portion? What do you think? Okay, good night, everybody. See you next week. It's been great.
Good night.